show that even the Warren Commission staff originally assumed that the shot to the back was about 5.5 inches below the collar. Here you can see it here, and then this is where the alleged entry wound occurred in the back of the head. This may be my favorite photograph in the entire history of the assassination, because here you have young junior counsel Arlen Specter, now the senior senator from Pennsylvania, holding a pointer that is showing the trajectory the magic bullet would have had to have taken if the magic bullet theory were true. And yet down below his hand, about 4 or 5 inches, you see this patch. You see the patch in the stand-in, which means that a photograph that's intended to illustrate the magic bullet theory actually refutes it. You may notice here, too, that they're doing their reenactment using the Secret Service Cadillac rather than the Lincoln limousine. And the differences between the vehicles are sufficient that for forensic purposes, a reconstruction using the wrong vehicle is going to have no legal significance. So it can't be the case that the Warren Commission staff were the only citizens or residents of the United States who did not know that Jack Kennedy was riding in a Lincoln limousine when he was assassinated, which raises questions about the integrity of the work they were doing and whether it was really intended at any stage to discover the truth. It even turns out now that the shift in the description of the back wound was actually directed by a then junior member of the commission, Gerald Ford, who was a Republican from Michigan, a member of the House of Representatives. This was among the very first documents released by the Assassination Records Review Board. And it occurred in time for me to include a copy of this article, which appeared in the New York Times in the first collection of our studies, which is entitled Assassination Science, and published in 1998. Ford himself was questioned about it and said, yes, he had been responsible for the change, and it had nothing to do with a conspiracy theory, but rather, he was interested in historical accuracy. Well, of course, it had nothing to do with a conspiracy theory. It had to do with a conspiracy to conceal the true causes of death of the President of the United States. Indeed, I may not have emphasized this point in talking about the Zapruder film, but the obvious reason you had to alter or recreate the Zapruder film was that when the driver pulled the limo to the left into a halt, it was such an obvious indication of Secret Service complicity that it had to be removed. And in the process, by contracting frames, as even Noel Twyman discovered, if you have this head turn that's twice as fast as humanly possible, that's an indication of the elimination of approximately half of the frames that were involved in those motions. By contracting the timeline and the events that are covered by the Zapruder film, you make it logically impossible for anyone who assumes the film is authentic to reconstruct what actually happened. So we have had generations of JFK students, some of whose names would be familiar to many in this room, who devoted their whole life to trying to reconstruct the shooting sequence based upon a fabricated film, which of course meant that they were destined to fail, couldn't possibly succeed. Now, if you want a stunning, relatively recent development, David Mandick took a patient with similar neck and chest dimensions to JFK and plotted the official trajectory the bullet was alleged to have taken, and found that it was in fact anatomically impossible because cervical vertebrae intervened. So if you got the entry point that the commission specified and the trajectory it took had to have taken to enter here at the throat, just above the thigh, it's not even a physically possible trajectory. A lot of us had wondered why, when Arlen Specter questioned the physicians, he didn't ask them what they saw or what they inferred from what they had observed, but instead posed to them a hypothetical question. The hypothetical question, in its essential said, if we assume a bullet entered here at the base of the back of the neck and traversed the neck without hitting any bony structures and came out at the throat, would that be consistent with describing the throat wound as a wound of exit? Well, I think a third grader could concede that if you assume it went in here, traveled through the neck without hitting any bony structure and came out here, then the throat wound would be a wound of exit. This was trivial. Such that, for example, Malcolm Perry, who had actually seen this wound up close and personal, he said, yes, that was true, but that he was not prepared to endorse the assumptions that he'd been asked to make in the posing of the question. And of course, this was a classic example of covering up by the use of a hypothetical question that was guaranteed to to produce a predetermined conclusion as opposed to seeking truth about what happened here. So if you actually look at the path of the magic bullet is alleged to have taken when you know the actual entry point. When you know the actual entry point is, 5.5 inches below the collar on the jacket or 5 3/4 below the collar on the shirt, rather than at the base of the back of the neck, you get the absurdity that Oliver Stone so well lampooned in JFK. You get a bullet coming in here, then executing a left-hand turn, going on, and you get all these different wounds in Conley, which, as I've already indicated, may even have been caused by separate shots. So that he may have had a shot to the chest, a separate shot that hit his wrist, and another shot that wound up in his thigh. Here, by the way, is a rather dim photograph of the bullet, but it's virtually pristine. In Murder in Dealey Plaza, which was the second of the 3 books that I've edited by bringing together the best experts on different aspects of the case, I published the magic bullet side by side with test bullets fired by the Warren Commission and by the House Select Committee when they reinvestigated the case in 1977-78, firing bullets into wads of cotton and buckets of water, and they're indistinguishable, so that if I hadn't pointed the magic bullet in a different direction than the test bullets, you would not have known which was which. There's some slight longitudinal distortion, but otherwise they're basically pristine. And here, if we need more evidence, after the autopsy was completed at Bethesda, the body was turned over to the mortician to prepare the body for burial. His name was Thomas Evan Robinson. He gave an interview in 1992 to a fellow named Joe West, who was an investigator, and he described the wounds as follows: a large gaping hole in the back of the head, patched by stretching a piece of rubber. He thought the skull was full of plaster of Paris. A smaller wound in the right temple, approximately 2 small shrapnel wounds in the face, packed with wax, and I'll come back to those. Here's the key one for our momentary purpose. Wound in the back, 5 to 6 inches below the shoulder to the right of the backbone. The adrenaline glands and the brain had been removed, no other organs removed, no swelling or discoloration to the face, meaning that JFK died instantly in Dealey Plaza. Hardly surprising when you understand that 1/3 to 1/2 of his brains were blown out during the shooting sequence. Now, what other evidence do we have to confirm what I've been telling you? Here is Charles Crenshaw, who is a resident at Parkland, who, at my request, made drawings. Now, why this wasn't done uniformly, why they didn't ask every physician who ever saw the body or every witness to make drawings, is beyond me. If you want to know the truth, what they actually saw, ask them to make drawings. Here was the wound before and after the tracheostomy, small, clean, circular wound. Here after the tracheostomy with a straight line incision, perfectly consistent with what Malcolm Perry, who performed the tracheostomy, had said. Here's a massive blowout to the back of the head. He described this to me as the size of a baseball or of your fist when you double it up. Now take your fist, double it up, and put it to the back of your head where this wound occurred. You see that's a pretty massive hole in the back of your head. Here we have a very interesting photograph. This is purports to be an autopsy photograph. Just contrast now the appearance of the throat with that straight line incision over that clean bullet hole. Very different. This has led some, such as David Lifton, to infer that the body might have been altered. And it's certainly the case that either the body is altered or the photograph is faked. Here's something else that's very interesting. The eyes are open. Charles Crenshaw told me that when he was the last physician to observe JFK before he was wrapped in sheets and placed in this large ceremonial bronze casket, and he closed his eyes before he went into the coffin. So now the eyes are open, and here you have this funny little patch, which Robert Groden, for example, has accented in some of his work on the killing of a president. It looks like, almost like duct tape has been put over right there in the corner of the right temple where the entry wound